They thought Earth would break in a single strike. They thought our fire would burn out, our soldiers silenced, our will erased. But they did not understand. We are the ghosts in the smoke, the voices in the ruins, the fire that refuses to die. When giants fall, it is not by power. It is by those who endure, adapt, and rise again. This is humanity's story. The last stand at Firebase Echo, the morning before the storm. Commander Sarah Chen stood on the cracked concrete walls of Firebase Echo, watching 3 suns rise over the alien landscape. Her breath formed small clouds in the cold morning air as she counted the distant shapes moving across the horizon. The Zephyrian fleet had grown larger overnight. "Ma'am, they're not even trying to hide anymore," said Sergeant Rodriguez, joining her on the wall. His Mexican accent was thick with exhaustion. "My scouts count at least 50 heavy cruisers moving into position." Sarah nodded slowly. Firebase Echo had been humanity's last major stronghold on Kepler 442b for 3 months. Now, with only 87 soldiers left from the original 1,000-strong garrison, she knew their time was running out. "How long until they're in firing range?" she asked. 6 hours, maybe 7 if we're lucky." Sarah looked down at the compound below. Soldiers from 12 different Earth nations worked side by side, preparing defenses that everyone knew wouldn't be enough. There was Johnson from Texas, carefully placing explosive charges around the ammunition depot. Tanaka from Japan was helping the medics set up a field hospital in the deepest bunker. Anderson from Norway was teaching younger soldiers how to field strip alien weapons they'd captured in earlier battles. The enemy. They underestimated. The Zephyrians had been conquering worlds for over 300 years. They were tall, gray-skinned beings with 4 arms and technology that made Earth's best weapons look like stone tools. Their standard strategy was simple: overwhelm with superior firepower, accept surrender, move to the next planet. But humans kept fighting even when the battles should have been over. "Commander Chen," called out Private Morrison, running up from the communications bunker. "We're getting scattered reports from other outposts. The aliens are broadcasting surrender demands across all frequencies." Sarah took the radio handset. The voice that came through spoke perfect English, though with a strange metallic quality. "Human defenders of Firebase Echo, you have fought bravely, but your cause is hopeless. Surrender now, and you will be treated with the honor due to warriors. Continue fighting and you will be eliminated." Sarah keyed the microphone. "This is Commander Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Force. I have a counteroffer for you." There was a pause. Then, "Speak. You leave our planet, and we won't have to teach you why humans don't surrender." Harsh laughter came through the radio. "You have less than 100 soldiers against our entire battle fleet. What lesson could you possibly teach us?" "You'll find out," Sarah said, and turned off the radio. Preparation for the impossible. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Sarah walked among her soldiers, checking preparations and offering quiet words of encouragement. She found Corporal Yamamoto working on a strange device made from salvaged alien components. "What's that, Corporal?" "Experimental communication disruptor, ma'am. If it works, it should interfere with their command frequencies for about 10 minutes. "And if it doesn't work?" Yamamoto grinned. "Then it makes a very impressive explosion." In the armory, she found Staff Sergeant O'Brien showing recruits how to modify human grenades with alien power cells. "The blast radius increases by about 300%, he explained in his thick Irish accent. "But the timer gets unpredictable, so cook it for 2 seconds, not 3. Private Hassan, barely 19 and originally from Cairo, was painting messages on artillery shells. Sarah couldn't read Arabic, but she suspected they weren't poetry. "What do they say?" she asked. Hassan smiled shyly. "Traditional Egyptian farewell wishes for our enemies, Commander. Very traditional." The Zephyrian advance. By midday, the alien fleet was visible to the naked eye. Massive wedge-shaped ships moved through the sky like floating cities, their hulls gleaming in the triple sunlight. Ground forces followed in their shadows, columns of armored vehicles that moved with mechanical precision. "They're not even bothering with reconnaissance," observed Lieutenant Park, Sarah's intelligence officer. "They think they know everything about our capabilities." "Good," Sarah replied. "Overconfidence has ended more wars than superior firepower." The first alien artillery barrage began at 1500 hours. Plasma bolts the size of cars crashed into Firebase Echo's outer defenses, turning concrete into vapor and metal into slag. The human defenders took cover in tunnels they'd dug by hand over the past 3 months, but the aliens noticed something strange. Instead of panicking or sending out surrender flags, The humans seemed to be moving with purpose during the bombardment. Small groups dashed between cover points, carrying equipment and setting up positions in what looked like a planned retreat. The first lesson. When the Zephyrian ground forces advanced, they expected to find broken defenders ready to surrender. Instead, they walked into the most complex series of booby traps, crossfire zones, and ambush points that their species had ever encountered. Sergeant Rodriguez had turned the main approach into a maze of hidden explosives. When the first alien patrol triggered them, the chain reaction destroyed an entire column of vehicles. From concealed positions, Corporal Singh and her sniper team began picking off alien officers. The Zephyrians had never faced an enemy that specifically targeted leadership during battle. "Their formation is breaking down," reported Lieutenant Park over the radio. "They're confused about who's giving orders." In the command bunker, Sarah listened to alien radio chatter through stolen communication equipment. Even without understanding their language, she could hear the confusion and growing frustration in their voices. The battle raged for 6 hours. Wave after wave of alien forces crashed against Firebase Echo's defenses, only to be turned back by tactics they didn't understand. Humans fought from positions that shouldn't have been defensible, using weapons that shouldn't have been effective, coordinating in ways that their enemy couldn't predict. As the third sun set, painting the battlefield in shades of red and orange, the alien forces pulled back to regroup. Firebase Echo still flew the blue and white flag of Earth, though it was now full of holes. The message sent. That night, as Sarah walked among the wounded and counted their casualties, she knew they couldn't survive another day like this one. But as she looked at the faces of her soldiers, tired, dirty, but unbroken, she also knew something had changed. For the first time in 300 years, the Zephyrian Empire had failed to take an objective on schedule. For the first time, an enemy had made them retreat. The galaxy was about to learn what humans meant when they said they don't surrender. Part 2. Ghosts in the Smoke. The morning after dawn came gray and smoky over Firebase Echo. The alien bombardment had turned most of the base into twisted metal and broken concrete, but Commander Sarah Chen was already moving through the ruins with a small team of survivors. The Zephyrians thought they had won. Their morning reconnaissance flights showed only smoke and silence. They were wrong. 30 feet underground in tunnels that hadn't appeared on any of their scans, 63 humans were very much alive. They had food, water, ammunition, and most importantly, they had a plan. "Sound off by teams," Sarah whispered into her throat microphone. The responses came back in quiet voices from hidden positions across the destroyed base. "Demo team ready. Rodriguez here with 8 volunteers and enough explosives to redecorate half their camp. Sniper team in position. Volkov reporting. We have clear sight lines to their command post. Tech team standing by. Park has their communication frequencies mapped and ready for disruption." Sarah smiled grimly. The Zephyrians had studied human military tactics from Earth's databases. They knew about formations, supply lines, and conventional warfare, but they had never encountered humans who had nothing left to lose. The art of being dead. Elena Volkov lay perfectly still in a sniper's nest built from rubble and camouflaged with alien debris. The Russian marksman had been hunting since she was 12 years old in the Siberian wilderness. Now, at 28, she was hunting something much more dangerous. Through her scope, she watched Zephyrian officers standing casually in their command area, discussing the day's operations. They weren't wearing full combat armor because they believed all threats had been eliminated. "Target acquired," she whispered. Senior officer, blue markings on armor, giving orders to subordinates. "Take the shot," came Sarah's voice through the earpiece. The rifle cracked once. 800 meters away, the alien commander's head snapped back, and he collapsed onto the metallic deck of their mobile command platform. The other aliens scattered, shouting in their harsh language, but they couldn't see where the shot had come from. Elena was already moving to her secondary position when the return fire began. Plasma bolts scorched the air where she had been lying moments before, but found only empty space and cooling metal. Explosive personalities. Marcus Torres had been a demolitions expert in the Spanish army before volunteering for the Colonial Defense Force. Now, crawling through drainage pipes beneath the alien camp, he was about to put his skills to creative use. The Zephyrians had set up their supply depot in what they thought was a secure area surrounded by sensor arrays and automated defenses. But they hadn't thought to check the old human storm drains that ran beneath their chosen site. Marcus emerged from a drain cover like a ghost, quickly planted his charges among the ammunition containers, and disappeared back underground before the alien guards completed their patrol circuit. The charges were set with timer delays. Some would explode in 10 minutes, others in 20, others in an hour. The goal wasn't just destruction, it was terror. When the first explosion rocked the supply depot, alien soldiers rushed to investigate. The second blast caught them in the open. The third explosion came from a completely different direction, making them think they were surrounded. "Beautiful work, Torres," Sarah's voice crackled through his earpiece. "Their entire security formation is breaking down. They're jumping at shadows." "Wait until tonight, Commander," Marcus replied, already moving to his next target. "I've saved the best fireworks for when they think they're safe." The network effect. David Park had been a computer programmer before the war, specializing in network security for major corporations. Now he was using those skills to turn the aliens' own technology against them. From his hidden position in the base's old communication center, David had spent the night hacking into captured Zephyrian equipment. Their technology was advanced, but they had made one crucial mistake. They assumed no primitive species could understand their systems. "I'm into their tactical network," David reported, "uploading false sensor data now. As far as their computers know, they're being attacked by 300 humans from multiple directions." The effect was immediate. Alien patrols began converging on empty positions, chasing sensor ghosts that David created with a few lines of code. Their response times slowed as they second-guessed every reading, every alarm. But David's masterpiece was still to come. He had discovered that the Zephyrian communication system used quantum entanglement for instantaneous contact across space. If he could introduce the right virus into their network, it wouldn't just affect the local forces. It would spread to every Zephyrian ship in the system. Psychology of fear. By midday, the alien camp was in chaos. Officers were shouting contradictory orders. Soldiers were firing at nothing. Their precise, disciplined formation had dissolved into nervous clusters of troops watching the sky for threats that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Dr. Lisa Santos, the team's medic and former psychology professor, observed the enemy through concealed cameras that David had hacked. "They're showing classic signs of paranoid stress," she reported. "Heart rates elevated, decision-making compromised, unit cohesion breaking down." Sarah nodded. Humans had been the prey species for most of their evolution. They understood fear from both sides, how to feel it and how to use it. "Increase the pressure," she ordered. "Random shots from different positions. Make them think we're everywhere." Over the next hour, single sniper shots came from north, south, east, and west. Each shot was carefully placed to wound rather than kill, creating screaming victims that panicked their comrades. The aliens began firing wildly at any movement, even when it was just wind blowing debris. Night terrors. As the twin moons rose, the real psychological warfare began. Marcus Torres had rigged a series of small charges with motion sensors around the alien perimeter. Not enough to cause serious damage, but enough to create sudden flashes and loud noises throughout the night. Every few minutes, another explosion would light up a different section of their camp. Alien soldiers would rush to investigate, find nothing, and return to their posts more nervous than before. Elena Volkov added to the terror with precise shots that came from impossible angles. She had memorized every sightline, every hiding place in the ruins. To the aliens, it seemed like the very landscape was shooting at them. David Park contributed by randomly activating their own equipment. Lights would flicker on and off, communication systems would emit bursts of static, vehicle engines would start and stop without orders. "Their stress hormones are off the charts," reported Dr. Santos, monitoring alien communications. "Some of their soldiers are refusing to leave the ships." The message spreads. By dawn of the second day, word of Firebase Echo was spreading through the Zephyrian fleet. Captains reported that a handful of humans were somehow holding an entire division at bay. Ground commanders requested additional troops, only to have those reinforcements succumb to the same mysterious attacks. In the hidden command bunker, Sarah listened to intercepted communications. The aliens were arguing among themselves, some calling for orbital bombardment, others insisting they needed to capture humans alive to understand their tactics. "Commander," called Corporal Patel from the radio station, "we're picking up signals from other resistance cells. Brisbane base says they've been monitoring our transmissions and copying our methods. New Tokyo reports similar results." Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope, not just for Firebase Echo, but for the entire war. "Patch me through to all frequencies," she ordered. "All human forces, all resistance cells, open channel." Her voice carried across the planet, reaching every hidden group of survivors, every desperate last stand, every human who had refused to surrender. "This is Commander Sarah Chen at Firebase Echo. We are 73 soldiers fighting a division of aliens. We have been dead for 2 days, and we are winning. Copy our methods. Spread the word. Show the galaxy what happens when you underestimate the human spirit." The responses came flooding back, voices from around the world speaking in dozens of languages, all saying the same thing. They were ready to fight. Part 3. The network awakens connections in the dark. 3 days after Firebase Echo's destruction, human resistance cells across Kepler 442b were no longer fighting alone. In hidden bunkers from the northern ice fields to the equatorial forests, survivors huddled around jury-rigged communication equipment, sharing tactics and coordinates. Commander Sarah Chen stood before a makeshift holographic display that David Park had assembled from salvaged alien technology. Red dots marked confirmed resistance cells, blue dots showed suspected Zephyrian positions, and green lines connected the growing network of human fighters. 67 active cells, reported Lieutenant Park, his fingers dancing over alien control interfaces. From squad-sized teams to company-level formations, total estimated strength, 4,000 humans still fighting. Sarah studied the display. The aliens controlled every major city, spaceport, and industrial center. But between those points of light, in the darkness they considered empty and pacified, humanity was building something the Zephyrian Empire had never encountered before. A distributed resistance that thought like a single organism. The teacher and the student. In the ruins of New Shanghai, Captain Liu Wei crouched beside a young corporal named Jackson. The American soldier was barely 20, recruited from a farming community in Kansas. Now he was learning to plant explosives with the precision of a surgeon. The key is timing, Liu explained, his English careful but clear. Not just when the device explodes, but when the enemy discovers it. Fear comes from uncertainty. Jackson nodded, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool underground air. Back home we use similar tactics against coyotes threatening the livestock. Make them think danger is everywhere and they find somewhere else to hunt. Exactly, Liu smiled. Except these coyotes have plasma cannons. Above them, a Zephyrian patrol passed, their heavy footsteps vibrating through the concrete. Liu and Jackson froze, barely breathing, until the sounds faded. Then they returned to their work, placing charges that would activate only when stepped on by something weighing more than 300 pounds. Human weight wouldn't trigger them. Alien weight would. Scientific warfare. Dr. Elena Rodriguez had been studying xenobiology at the University of Sao Paulo when the invasion began. Now, in a hidden laboratory beneath the Amazon research station, she was putting her knowledge to military use. I've analyzed their atmospheric requirements, she explained to the assembled resistance leaders via encrypted video link. The Zephyrians breathe a nitrogen-oxygen mixture similar to ours but with higher carbon dioxide tolerance. However, they're extremely sensitive to certain organic compounds. On her screen, Sarah could see test tubes filled with various plant extracts. What kind of sensitivity? Respiratory irritation leading to temporary blindness and disorientation. I've isolated the compounds from 3 native plants that grow abundantly near their bases. We can create smoke grenades that are harmless to humans but incapacitating to them. The implications were enormous. Every resistance cell near those plants could suddenly produce weapons that would level the playing field. Dr. Rodriguez, said Captain Morrison from the Australian cell, how quickly can you distribute the formula? Already transmitted, David Park's communication network should have it spreading to every cell within the hour. The mechanics innovation. In the flooded tunnels beneath Port Victoria, Chief Petty Officer Kowalski was solving a different problem. The Polish engineer had been maintaining spacecraft systems for 15 years, and now she was reverse engineering Zephyrian technology with tools made from scrap metal. Their power cells operate on a quantum resonance frequency, she explained to her small team while elbow deep in an alien power unit. But if you introduce a harmonic dissonance at exactly the right moment, the power cell in her hand suddenly tripled its output, glowing bright blue. Her team stepped back nervously. You can overload them remotely, Kowalski finished with satisfaction. Every alien device within 50 meters will either explode or shut down permanently. Private Hassan, the young Egyptian soldier from Firebase Echo who had been transferred to help coordinate between cells, grinned broadly. Chief, how many of these frequency disruptors can you build? Give me a week and every resistance cell will have at least 3. Give me a month, and we can turn their own technology into a planet-wide weapon. The Zephyrian Response High Admiral Krax stood on the bridge of the orbital command ship, studying reports that made no sense. His forearms gestured in agitation as he addressed his senior staff. Explain to me how 4,000 scattered primitives are disrupting operations across an entire planet, he demanded, his translator rendering his anger into flat mechanical English. Sub-Commander Voth, responsible for ground operations, shifted uncomfortably. They fight unlike any species we have encountered. No centralized command structure to eliminate, no critical infrastructure to destroy. When we attack one cell, 3 others appear elsewhere. They learn from each success, added Intelligence Officer Theiss. Tactics that work against one group are immediately shared with all others. It's as if we're fighting a single enemy with 1,000 bodies. Admiral Krax had conquered 47 worlds. He had faced desperate last stands, heroic defenses, and cunning stratagems, but he had never encountered an enemy that grew stronger as it took losses. Increase orbital surveillance, he ordered. Use thermal imaging, electromagnetic scanning, gravitometric sensors. These humans must have some weakness we can exploit. But as his sensors swept the planet below, they found only empty ruins and silent forests. The humans had learned to move through gaps in Zephyrian technology, like water flowing around stones. Underground networks. Beneath the surface of Kepler 442b, a hidden war was being fought in tunnels, sewers, and natural caves. Sergeant Martinez, formerly of the Mexican Planetary Marines, led a team through drainage systems that connected 3 major cities. The beauty of fighting underground, she explained to new recruits as they navigated flooded tunnels, is that they can't use their air superiority. Down here, it's just us and them, and we know every pipe, every junction, every emergency exit. Her team emerged from a storm drain directly beneath a Zephyrian supply convoy. Within minutes, they had planted charges, disappeared back underground, and were already moving toward their next target. The explosions would occur in sequence over the next 6 hours, making it impossible for the aliens to predict the pattern. Meanwhile, in the mountains north of Firebase Echo, Elena Volkov had established a sniper school for resistance fighters. Former hunters, soldiers, and even a few civilian marksmen learned to use captured alien weapons with deadly precision. Remember, she told them in her accented English, you shoot once, you move immediately. Let them fear the silence between shots more than the shots themselves. Her students practiced on targets that simulated alien anatomy, learning to disable rather than kill when possible. Wounded enemies created more chaos than dead ones. The communication revolution. David Park's network had evolved beyond simple radio communications. Using a combination of quantum entanglement devices stolen from aliens, fiber optic cables salvaged from human cities, and even trained birds carrying encoded messages, the Resistance could now coordinate operations across continents in real time. We're receiving tactical data from New Beijing, Park reported to Sarah as streams of information flowed across his displays. Their cell is about to hit an ammunition depot. Success rate for similar operations, 87%. Sarah watched the data flow, seeing patterns that would have been impossible for any single commander to track. The Resistance was learning, adapting, evolving faster than any military force in history. What's our next priority target? She asked. The orbital communication relay station, Park replied without hesitation. If we can take it offline for even 10 minutes, we can blind their entire fleet. Dr. Patel in the Mumbai cell thinks she can hack their quantum encryption if we can get close enough. Sarah nodded. It was an impossible mission against overwhelming odds. In other words, exactly the kind of challenge that humans seem to excel at. The ripple effect. News of the human resistance was spreading beyond Kepler 442b. In cantinas on distant space stations, traders whispered about the planet where humans refused to die. On conquered worlds throughout Zephyrian space, subject species began asking questions their rulers didn't want to answer. If humans could fight back, why couldn't they? On Firebase Echo, now rebuilt entirely underground, Sarah received a message that changed everything. It came from a source she had never expected, a member of the Altarian species, one of the first races conquered by the Zephyrians 3 centuries ago. Commander Chen, the translated message read, we have watched your resistance with great interest. Perhaps it is time for old grievances to be settled. Perhaps it is time for the conquered to remember how to fight. Sarah stared at the message for a long moment, then began composing her reply. The resistance was about to become something much larger than a human rebellion. It was about to become a galactic revolution. Part 4. Lessons in Fear. The psychological battlefield. Admiral Krax's sleep cycle had been disrupted for 7 standard days. Each time he entered the regeneration chamber, reports of new human attacks flooded his neural interface. The primitives were fighting a war he didn't understand, using tactics that violated every principle of civilized combat. In the medical bay of his command ship, Zephyrian soldiers lay in treatment pods, their minds as damaged as their bodies. The ship's chief medical officer, Dr. Thynar, presented her findings with 4 hands trembling. Admiral, these soldiers exhibit symptoms I have never encountered. Persistent anxiety, hypervigilance, and what humans call phantom pain from wounds that have healed completely. They fear returning to the surface. Crack studied the medical data flowing across his display. Battle trauma was not unknown among Zephyrian forces, but this was different. These soldiers were afraid of an enemy that appeared and vanished like smoke that turned their own environment against them. How many requests for transfer off-planet have we received? 47 in the last day cycle, including 3 from company commanders. For the first time in his military career, Admiral Krax felt something he had not experienced since childhood: uncertainty, the art of invisible war. In the ruins of what had once been Capital City's financial district, Sergeant Chen Lu moved through shadows like a predator. The former Chinese Special Forces operator had spent 3 weeks studying Zephyrian patrol patterns, learning their habits, understanding their weaknesses. Aliens were creatures of routine. They followed protocols, maintained schedules, and trusted their technology. Humans were creatures of adaptation. Chen Lu waited in a collapsed office building as a Zephyrian patrol approached. Through her scope, she watched their formation. Always the same diamond pattern, always the same spacing, always the same routes. They had conquered dozens of worlds using these methods, and they saw no reason to change. The patrol passed below her position. Chen Lu didn't fire. Instead, she activated a small device that emitted a sound at the exact frequency that caused discomfort to Zephyrian hearing. Not enough to cause damage, just enough to create unease. The aliens paused, looking around nervously. Their leader gestured for them to continue, but their formation had already lost its precision. They moved faster now, eager to complete their circuit and return to base. Chen Lu smiled and moved to her next position. She would repeat this process 12 more times during their patrol route. By the end, they would be running. Teaching the teachers at Firebase Echo, Commander Sarah Chen had established the first formal school for resistance warfare. Former soldiers, police officers, hunters, and even civilian volunteers gathered in the underground chambers to learn from veterans who had survived the first weeks of fighting. "Forget everything you know about fair fighting," Sarah told a class of 30 new recruits. "The Zephyrians have better weapons, better armor, and better technology, but they have one critical weakness: they think war has rules." She gestured to a holographic display showing typical alien formations. They march in straight lines because their computers tell them it's efficient. They attack during daylight because their doctrine says darkness favors defenders. They retreat when casualties reach 15% because their military manuals define that as an acceptable loss threshold. A young farmer from the agricultural colonies raised his hand. "How does knowing that help us, ma'am?" Sarah's smile was predatory. "Because humans wrote the book on breaking rules." The sound of silence. Dr. Maria Santos had been a psychologist specializing in trauma treatment before the war. Now she was using her knowledge to create trauma in others. Her latest project involved studying captured recordings of Zephyrian communication during successful human attacks. "Fear has a frequency," she explained to the resistance cell leaders during their weekly briefing. "When they're afraid, their vocal patterns change in specific ways. We can use this to identify units that are most vulnerable to psychological pressure." Her analysis had revealed something remarkable. The alien language contained emotional undertones that their translators couldn't interpret. But human ears, evolved to detect subtle changes in vocal stress, could recognize panic even without understanding the words. "Intelligence Officer Park has isolated 3 audio signatures that indicate extreme stress in Zephyrian forces," Dr. Santos continued. "When we detect these patterns, we know their unit cohesion is breaking down. That's when we strike." The implications were staggering. The resistance could now predict when alien forces were vulnerable, turning psychology into military intelligence. The student becomes the master captain. Liu Wei had been teaching asymmetric warfare to resistance cells across the planet. Now his students were developing innovations that surprised even him. In the industrial sector ruins, a group of former factory workers had created something entirely new. "We call it productive sabotage," explained Foreman Jackson, the young American from Kansas who had become Liu's most creative student. "Instead of just destroying alien equipment, we modify it to fail in specific ways." Jackson led Liu through a workshop hidden in the basement of a destroyed manufacturing plant. Workbenches were covered with alien devices in various stages of modification. "This sensor array, for example," Jackson continued, picking up a modified scanning device. "We've changed its frequency range so it detects everything except humans. Their patrols will be jumping at shadows while we walk right past them." Liu examined the device with professional appreciation. "How did you learn to modify their technology?" "Same principles as fixing farm equipment back home," Jackson grinned. "Find the part that's causing problems and make it cause different problems instead." It was pure human ingenuity. taking something designed to hurt them and turning it into a weapon against its creators. The ripple effect spreads. News of human resistance tactics was spreading beyond Kepler 442b through carefully encrypted messages carried by traders and smugglers. On the mining world of Kepler 186f, a group of enslaved Altarians attempted their first act of rebellion in 3 centuries. They failed. Their explosive devices were detected, their communication intercepted, their leaders executed. But word of their attempt spread like wildfire through the underground networks that connected subjugated peoples across Zephyrian space. On New Cygnus, a peaceful agricultural world, farmers began asking questions about their tribute quotas. On the industrial planet Vega Prime, factory workers started organizing in ways that made their overseers nervous. None of these were military threats. But Admiral Krax was beginning to understand that the human resistance was fighting a war that extended far beyond battlefields. The evolution of fear. In the depths of Firebase Echo, Elena Volkov was training a new generation of snipers when the priority alert came through. Zephyrian forces were massing for a major offensive, bringing in heavy armor and air support for the first time since the invasion. "They're scared," she told her students as they watched the enemy build up through concealed cameras. "Scared enough to commit resources they've been holding in reserve." The irony was not lost on her. The aliens had overwhelming technological superiority, but they were so afraid of invisible humans that they were deploying weapons designed to destroy cities against an enemy they couldn't even locate. "What does that tell us about their state of mind?" she asked her class. A former police officer from the colonies answered immediately. "They're not thinking strategically anymore. They're reacting emotionally." "Exactly," Volkov nodded. "And emotional enemies make mistakes, the price of understanding." High Admiral Krax stood before the Zephyrian High Command via quantum communication, his image flickering across space to the home world. The faces of his superiors displayed the same confusion he felt. "Explain the situation, Admiral," commanded Supreme Leader Thysos. "How have these primitives maintained resistance for over 2 months?" Krax had prepared for this moment, but the words were difficult to speak. "Supreme Leader, I believe we have fundamentally misunderstood the nature of human warfare. They do not fight to win battles. They fight to make continuing the war too costly to sustain." Silence stretched across the quantum link. Finally, War Master Kythax spoke. "Are you suggesting we cannot defeat them?" "I am suggesting, War Master, that defeating them may require us to become something we have never been before." Krax paused, choosing his words carefully. "They are teaching us that there are forms of strength we do not possess." The communication ended abruptly. Krax knew his career was likely over, but he had spoken the truth. The humans were not just fighting for their planet, they were fighting to prove that no species, regardless of technological advancement, could truly conquer another that refused to be conquered. In the tunnels beneath Firebase Echo, Sarah Chen received reports of the enemy buildup and began planning their response. The aliens were about to learn their next lesson about human warfare. Sometimes, the hunter becomes the hunted. Part 5, The Turning Tide, The Engineer's Revolution. Deep beneath the ruins of the Kepler 442b Science Institute, Dr. Lisa Santos worked by the light of improvised plasma torches. The former aerospace engineer had spent 6 weeks studying captured Zephyrian technology, and she was ready to turn their own weapons against them. "The beauty of their energy systems," she explained to the mixed group of human engineers and scientists gathered in her underground laboratory, "is that they're incredibly sophisticated but fundamentally standardized. Every device operates on the same quantum frequency." She held up a device the size of a human fist, its surface covered with salvaged components. "This frequency disruptor can overload any Zephyrian power system within a kilometer radius. But more importantly, it can be built using parts from their own disabled equipment." Engineer Park from the Korean resistance cell examined the device carefully. "How many can we produce?" "With the materials we've salvaged from their destroyed patrols, enough to equip every resistance cell on the planet. But that's just the beginning." Dr. Santos activated a holographic display showing the schematic for a much larger device. "This is the prototype for what I call the Liberation Engine. It doesn't just disrupt their technology, it permanently converts it to human control." The implications were staggering. Every alien weapon, vehicle, and communication device on the planet could potentially be turned into a tool for the resistance. The quantum breakthrough David Park had evolved from communication specialist to master of alien technology. In his hidden laboratory, screens displayed streams of data intercepted from Zephyrian command networks, but his latest discovery went far beyond simple espionage. "I've cracked their quantum encryption," he announced during the weekly resistance coordination meeting. "Not just read their messages, I can write messages that their system will accept as authentic." Commander Sarah Chen leaned forward. "What kind of messages? Orders, status reports, intelligence briefings? As far as their computers know, I'm a legitimate part of their command structure." David's fingers danced over alien interfaces. "I've already tested it by ordering a patrol to investigate a false radiation leak. They spent 6 hours searching empty tunnels." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. They could now make the alien army fight shadow wars against imaginary enemies, waste resources on pointless missions, and question every order they received. Weapons of mass confusion. In the Australian resistance cell's hidden workshop, Chief Petty Officer Kowalski had moved beyond simple sabotage. Her latest creation looked like a standard human radio, but it was connected to a network of modified alien communication nodes. "Watch this," she said, tuning the radio to a specific frequency. Immediately, alien voices filled the air, speaking in their harsh native language. Captain Morrison, the cell leader, frowned. "That's their tactical coordination channel. How are you accessing it?" "I'm not just accessing it," Kowalski grinned. "I'm controlling it." She began speaking into the radio in English. Her words were translated and transmitted across the alien network as if they were coming from a Zephyrian officer. She ordered a fictitious emergency redeployment, then watched through stolen surveillance feeds as alien forces scrambled to respond to threats that didn't exist. "This is just the prototype," Kowalski continued. "Give me another week, and I can turn their entire communication system into our personal puppet theater." The Snipers Network. Elena Volkov had trained 43 snipers across the planet, and now they were coordinating in ways that defied conventional military logic. Instead of operating as individuals, they functioned as a single distributed weapon system. "Target acquired, Industrial Sector 7, whispered Corporal Hassan through the encrypted communication network. From his position in the ruins of Cairo base, he had a clear shot at a Zephyrian supply officer. "Hold your fire," came Volkov's voice from 600 kilometers away. "Chen Lu, can you confirm visual on the convoy escort?" "Confirmed. 3 vehicles, 12 soldiers, 1 command unit." "Martinez, what's your position relative to their retreat route?" "I have the bridge overpass covered. Clean shots on any vehicles passing beneath." Volkov coordinated the attack like a conductor directing an orchestra. "Hassan, take the officer. Chen Lu, disable the command vehicle. Martinez, wait for my signal to hit the convoy. All snipers, after your shots, move to secondary positions immediately." The attack lasted 47 seconds. By the time the aliens could respond, the snipers had vanished into carefully prepared escape routes, leaving behind only confusion and casualties. The psychological multiplier. Dr. Maria Santos had refined her psychological warfare techniques to a precision that bordered on art. Her latest innovation involved using the aliens' own propaganda against them. "They broadcast daily reports to their home world about their progress," she explained to the assembled cell leaders. "But they also monitor communications for security threats. I've learned to embed subliminal stress patterns in the background of routine transmissions." The method was subtle but effective. Alien officers found themselves increasingly anxious without understanding why. Their decision-making became erratic, their formations sloppy, their morale fragile. "It's like acoustic torture," Santos continued, "but so subtle they don't even realize it's happening. Their own communication system is slowly driving them paranoid." The genius of the approach was its psychological plausibility. To the aliens, their growing anxiety seemed like a natural response to fighting an incomprehensible enemy. The moment of truth. The Zephyrian counteroffensive began at dawn on the 70th day of the resistance. Admiral Krax had committed 60% of his total forces to a coordinated assault on suspected human strongholds. It was the largest military operation in the planet's history. It was also the most spectacular failure. The assault forces advanced on carefully prepared coordinates provided by their intelligence networks, but those networks had been compromised for weeks. Every target was either empty or defended in ways that made no tactical sense. At Firebase Echo, Sarah Chen watched the alien advance through sensors that David Park had hacked into their own surveillance network. "They're committing everything to this attack," she observed. "Tanks, aircraft, even orbital support platforms." "Against positions we evacuated yesterday," Park replied. "Dr. Santos's fake intelligence reports convinced them we were massing for a counterattack." The aliens struck with overwhelming force at empty tunnels, abandoned buildings, and carefully prepared kill zones. Their bombardment was so intense it could be seen from orbit. When they finally advanced to claim victory, they found only a few resistance fighters who retreated exactly fast enough to maintain contact without being caught. For 6 hours, the entire Zephyrian army chased ghosts. The liberation engine activates. While the aliens wasted their strength attacking shadows, Dr. Santos activated her masterpiece. The liberation engine's signal propagated through the quantum field that connected all Zephyrian technology on the planet. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Alien weapons stopped responding to their users. Vehicle control systems began accepting commands from human operators. Communication networks started broadcasting resistance messages on all frequencies. In the tunnels beneath Capital City, Sergeant Martinez watched in amazement as a Zephyrian tank turned its cannon toward its own support vehicles and began firing. "Santos, what did you do to them?" "I gave their machines a choice," came the reply. "Apparently, they prefer humans." Across the planet, similar scenes played out as alien technology rebelled against its creators. Not every device was affected, but enough converted to turn the tide of battle in dozens of locations simultaneously. The cascade effect. High Admiral Crax stood on his command bridge, watching his carefully planned offensive collapse into chaos. Reports flooded in from across the planet. Units cut off when their vehicles stopped responding, weapons that fired on their own forces, communication networks that broadcast human propaganda. "Sir," reported Subcommander Voth, "we're losing contact with 70% of our ground forces. Their equipment appears to be malfunctioning simultaneously." Crax studied the tactical displays with growing dread. This wasn't malfunction, it was sabotage on a scale he had never imagined possible. "How did they penetrate our quantum encryption?" "Unknown, sir, but the pattern suggests they've had access to our systems for weeks, possibly months." For the first time in 3 centuries of conquest, a Zephyrian admiral was forced to order a general retreat from an enemy with inferior technology. The teacher's lesson. In the hidden command center of Firebase Echo, Sarah Chen addressed her officers as reports of victory flowed in from across the planet. "This is not the end," she warned. "This is the moment when they'll finally understand what they're fighting." She was right. As news of the failed offensive reached the Zephyrian home world, emergency sessions convened in their highest councils. For the first time, they faced an enemy that had turned their own advantages into weaknesses. The humans had done more than resist conquest. They had demonstrated that superior technology was meaningless against superior adaptation. They had shown that conventional military thinking was helpless against unconventional human creativity. Most importantly, they had proven that any species could learn to fight back if they had the courage to try. Across Zephyrian space, subject peoples watched the reports from Kepler 442b with growing interest. If humans could resist, perhaps freedom was not as impossible as they had believed. The resistance had become something larger than anyone had imagined. It had become hope. When predators become prey. The hunter's dilemma. Admiral Crax had not slept in 3 planetary rotations. The command center of his flagship buzzed with activity as his staff tried to comprehend reports that defied military logic. In 72 hours, his ground forces had gone from hunters to hunted. "Explain to me," he demanded, his forearms gesturing at the tactical display, "how an army equipped with quantum weapons and orbital support can be outmaneuvered by primitives hiding in ruins." Intelligence Officer Theiss shifted nervously. "Admiral, they no longer fight like primitives. Analysis suggests they have developed tactics specifically designed to exploit our operational doctrine." On the display, red markers showed Zephyrian positions being systematically isolated and eliminated. But the attacks came from directions that should have been impossible, using methods that violated every principle of civilized warfare. "They fight like animals," War Commander Voth snarled. "No honor, no codes of conduct, no respect for military tradition." Crax studied the pattern of losses. His forces controlled every major installation, every strategic point, every defensible position. Yet somehow, the humans were winning. Urban predators. In the twisted metal canyons of Capital City's ruins, Sergeant Chen Lu moved through shadows with deadly purpose. The former Special Forces operator had spent months learning every tunnel, every hidden passage, every sightline in the urban wasteland. Behind her, a squad of former civilians followed in perfect silence. A shopkeeper who had learned to place explosives with surgical precision. A teacher who could disable alien sensors with improvised electromagnetic pulses. A farmer who had become expert at reading alien patrol patterns. Contact ahead. Chen Lu whispered into her throat microphone. Zephyrian patrol, 6 soldiers, moving through Commerce District ruins. Through her scope, she watched the aliens advance in their standard formation. They moved with military precision, weapons ready, scanning for threats, but they were scanning in the wrong directions. The humans had learned that aliens looked for enemies at their own eye level, in positions that made sense to their tactical doctrine. They rarely looked up at seemingly impossible perches, or down into drainage systems, or behind debris that appeared too unstable to hide anything. Chen Lu's team struck from all 3 directions simultaneously. The attack lasted 11 seconds. When it ended, 6 more aliens had simply vanished from their patrol route, leaving only empty armor and the growing legend of invisible enemies, the art of vanishing. Captain Liu Wei had perfected what the resistance called ghost tactics, attacks that left no evidence of human involvement. His current operation targeted a heavily defended Zephyrian supply depot in the industrial sector. The aliens had learned to expect explosions, sniper fire, and equipment sabotage. They had not learned to expect their own automated systems to malfunction in precisely orchestrated sequences. Liu's team had spent 2 weeks infiltrating the depot's computer networks through maintenance tunnels. Now, at precisely 0300 hours, the facility's environmental controls began a cascade failure that appeared completely accidental. Lights flickered out in strategic patterns, forcing guards to move through predetermined routes. Automated loading systems activated without human command, creating noise and confusion. Emergency protocols engaged, sealing blast doors and trapping different units in separate sections. In the chaos, Liu's people moved like shadows, placing charges that would explode hours later when the facility was fully operational again. To the aliens, it would appear that their own equipment had suffered spontaneous failures. By dawn, the depot would be destroyed, and the Zephyrians would blame faulty technology rather than human sabotage. The psychology of isolation. Dr. Maria Santos had discovered something remarkable about Zephyrian psychology. As a species that had dominated the galaxy for centuries, they had never learned to cope with being prey. Their stress responses are fundamentally different from ours, she explained to the Resistance leadership during their weekly coordination meeting. Humans evolved as both predators and prey. We understand fear from both perspectives. They have only known themselves as apex predators. Her analysis of captured alien communications revealed psychological breakdown patterns that could be exploited. Zephyrian soldiers isolated from their units displayed panic responses similar to humans faced with claustrophobic environments. Separate them from their support networks, and they become irrational, Santos continued. They make tactical errors that would be unthinkable under normal circumstances. This insight had led to the development of isolation protocols, coordinated attacks designed not to kill aliens, but to cut them off from communication and reinforcement. Alone and afraid, even veteran Zephyrian warriors became vulnerable to tactics they would normally counter with ease. The network's evolution. David Park's communication system had evolved into something approaching telepathy. Resistance cells across the planet could coordinate attacks with split-second timing, share tactical intelligence in real time, and adapt to changing situations faster than any centralized command structure. We're receiving confirmation from 17 cells, Park reported as data flowed across his screens. Operation Nightfall is synchronized and ready to execute. Operation Nightfall was the most ambitious resistance action yet attempted. Simultaneous strikes on 43 Zephyrian installations, timed to create maximum confusion and prevent effective response. The aliens would think they were facing an army of thousands, when in reality they were facing a few hundred humans who had learned to fight like a single organism. Countdown initiated, Park announced. All cells report ready, executing in 3, 2, 1, mark. Across the planet, explosions bloomed like deadly flowers. Communication arrays went silent, supply depots erupted in flames. Transport vehicles found their routes blocked by perfectly timed landslides and structural collapses. To the Zephyrians, it appeared that the humans had suddenly multiplied into a massive military force. In reality, it was the same small groups they had been fighting all along, but coordinated with inhuman precision. The Weapon Master's Art Chief Petty Officer Kowalski had moved beyond simple sabotage to what she called technological Aikido, using the enemy's strength against them. Her latest creation turned Zephyrian vehicles into guided missiles aimed at their own forces. The principle is simple, she explained while demonstrating her override system. Their automated navigation systems are designed to prevent collisions and maintain formation integrity, but if you introduce false sensor data suggesting obstacles where none exist, On her screen, a hijacked Zephyrian transport suddenly veered off course, its computer convinced it was avoiding a collision. The vehicle crashed directly into a communication relay, destroying both. Their safety systems become delivery mechanisms, Kowalski continued with satisfaction. Every precaution they've built into their technology becomes a weapon we can use against them. Her innovations had turned the aliens' own logistics network into a trap. Supply convoys found themselves delivering explosives instead of ammunition. Transport ships landed at coordinates that placed them in perfect positions for resistance attacks. The sniper's web. Elena Volkov's network of shooters had evolved into something that transcended traditional military organization. They operated like neurons in a vast brain, each sniper connected to all others through instantaneous communication. Target Alpha 7, confirm visual, came the whisper through her earpiece. The voice belonged to Hassan, positioned 3 kilometers away in the ruins of the old university. Confirmed, replied Chen Lu from her position overlooking the government district. Senior officer, blue insignia, surrounded by 6 guards. Volkov processed the information instantly. Martinez, can you confirm escape routes? Negative on vehicle support. They're on foot following standard patrol route 7. Perfect. Volkov's voice carried the cold satisfaction of a predator closing on prey. Hassan, take the target when he reaches the intersection. Chen Lu, disable communications immediately after. Martinez, cover the retreat route. All shooters, fire and fade protocol. The coordinated strike happened with clockwork precision. The alien officer fell, his communication equipment died, and his guards found their escape route blocked by sniper fire. By the time reinforcements arrived, the shooters had vanished into prepared hiding places, but the psychological effect was even more devastating than the tactical victory. The aliens now knew that nowhere was safe, that their senior officers could be eliminated at will, that the humans could strike anywhere with supernatural coordination. The teacher's final lesson. Commander Sarah Chen stood in the rebuilt command center of Firebase Echo, watching tactical displays that showed the transformation of human resistance into something unprecedented. Her ragged band of survivors had become the nucleus of a planetary liberation movement. Status report, she requested. 73% of Zephyrian ground forces are now confined to hardened positions, reported Lieutenant Park. They've abandoned routine patrols and are operating under siege protocols. Orbital surveillance shows increasing activity around their spaceports, added Dr. Santos. Intelligence suggests they're considering evacuation of non-essential personnel. Sarah absorbed the information with grim satisfaction. The Zephyrians were no longer fighting to conquer Kepler 442b. They were fighting to maintain a foothold on a planet that had become their nightmare. What's the status of the galactic situation? Intelligence reports suggest unrest on 17 worlds within Zephyrian space, Park replied. The Altarians have begun organized resistance. The Kepler 62e colonies are refusing tribute demands. Even some Zephyrian client species are questioning their loyalty. Sarah nodded slowly. The resistance had accomplished something beyond their wildest hopes. They had not just defended their world, they had inspired a galactic rebellion. The Empire's response. In the emergency chambers of the Zephyrian High Command, Supreme Leader Thysos faced a crisis unlike any in their species' history. Reports from across their empire painted a picture of growing instability triggered by events on a single primitive world. The humans have become a symbol, War Master Kythax reported, his voice heavy with disbelief. Subject species throughout our territory are using their resistance as justification for rebellion. How many worlds are affected? Thysos demanded. 23 confirmed uprisings, 47 instances of civil disobedience, and countless reports of seditious communications. The humans have somehow turned defeat into victory without winning a single major battle. Thysos studied the strategic displays showing their vast empire. For 3 centuries they had maintained control through the simple principle that resistance was futile. Now, a handful of primitives had proven that principle false. What are our options? We can commit our full battle fleet to eliminating the human resistance, Kythax replied. But doing so would require withdrawing forces from 12 sectors, potentially triggering larger rebellions. Or, we negotiate a withdrawal from Kepler 442b. Publicly, we declare it a failed colonization attempt due to environmental factors. The silence that followed was the sound of an empire realizing it had met its match. The Predator's fear. Admiral Krax received his final orders with something approaching relief. The evacuation of Kepler 442b would begin immediately. Non-essential personnel would be withdrawn first, followed by equipment and finally military forces. It was the first retreat in Zephyrian military history. As he prepared the withdrawal orders, Krax reflected on the lessons his species had learned from their encounter with humanity. Superior technology was meaningless without superior will. Military doctrine was useless against enemies who refused to follow the rules. Most importantly, there was no such thing as inevitable victory. The humans had taught the galaxy that freedom was always possible for those brave enough to fight for it. In the depths of Firebase Echo, Sarah Chen watched the alien evacuation begin and knew that the real war was just beginning. The resistance had saved their world, but they had also lit a fire that would spread across the galaxy. Humanity had shown the universe what it meant to never surrender. The price of underestimating humanity. The Last Stand's legacy. 6 months after the Zephyrian evacuation, Kepler 442b had become something unprecedented in galactic history, a liberated world that had never been truly conquered. Commander Sarah Chen stood in the rebuilt capital, watching ships from across the galaxy land at the spaceport that had once served alien occupiers. But these were not invaders. They were delegations from every major species in known space, coming to study what the galaxy had begun calling the human solution. Representative from the Altarian Republic requesting immediate audience, reported Lieutenant Park, now serving as diplomatic liaison. They want to establish formal military cooperation agreements. Sarah nodded, watching another ship descend from orbit. And the Kepler 62e delegation? They're asking for training in resistance tactics. Apparently they're planning to declare independence from Zephyrian tributary status. Through the command center's windows, Sarah could see the remarkable sight of former resistance fighters teaching combat techniques to aliens who had traveled hundreds of light years to learn from them. Sergeant Chen Lu was demonstrating urban warfare tactics to a group of insectoid beings from the Vega system. Elena Volkov had established a sniper school that now trained marksmen from 17 different species. The teacher becomes the taught. Dr. Lisa Santos had transformed her underground laboratory into a formal research institute, but her students were no longer human. Alien engineers from across the galaxy came to study her work on technological adaptation and reverse engineering. The key insight, she explained to a mixed class of humans and aliens, is that any sufficiently advanced technology becomes vulnerable to creative misuse. The more sophisticated the system, the more ways it can be turned against its creators. A young Altarian raised one of her forearms. Dr. Santos, our world has been under Zephyrian control for 3 centuries. Their technology is completely integrated into our infrastructure. How do we begin the process of liberation? Santos smiled. The same way we did. One small act of defiance at a time. You don't need to overthrow the entire system at once. You just need to prove that resistance is possible. Her words carried weight throughout the galaxy. On dozens of worlds, subject species began testing small acts of rebellion, learning that their oppressors were not as invincible as they had believed. The network spreads. David Park's communication innovations had evolved beyond the Resistance's wildest dreams. The quantum entanglement network that had coordinated human fighters now connected liberation movements across the galaxy. Real-time tactical coordination that had once been limited to a single planet now spanned star systems. We're receiving priority signals from 47 worlds, Park reported during the daily intelligence briefing. The Zephyrians are facing coordinated uprisings on multiple fronts. The beauty of the system was its distributed nature. There was no central command structure for the Zephyrians to target, no key installation they could destroy to cripple the resistance. Each world's liberation movement was independent but connected, sharing tactics and intelligence while maintaining operational security. Status on the Altarian campaign? Sarah asked. They've successfully reclaimed their industrial sector using modified siege tactics. The Zephyrians are withdrawing to orbital platforms. Kepler 62e situation? Complete success. The Human Resistance Manual has been translated into their native language and distributed to every population center. The Zephyrians declared the world economically non-viable and began evacuation last week. Sarah allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The resistance had become something larger than military action. It had become an idea that spread like wildfire through the galaxy, the Empire's collapse. In the emergency session chambers of the Zephyrian High Command, Supreme Leader Thysos faced reports that would have been unthinkable just 1 year earlier. Their 300-year-old empire was crumbling not from external invasion, but from internal rebellion inspired by a single primitive world. Current status report, Thysos demanded. War Master Kythax's voice carried defeat. We maintain control of our core systems in 17 tributary worlds. 43 systems have declared independence, 29 others are in active rebellion, and we're receiving reports of seditious activity in our remaining territories. How is this possible? These species were pacified generations ago. They learned from the humans' supreme leader. The idea that resistance is possible has spread faster than our ability to contain it. Admiral Krax, recently returned from the disaster at Kepler 442b, spoke with the authority of someone who had witnessed the impossible. Supreme Leader, we fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the human threat. We thought we were fighting for territory. They were fighting for something much more dangerous: hope. The silence that followed was the sound of an empire realizing that its foundational principle, that conquest was permanent, had been shattered by beings they had dismissed as primitive. The psychological revolution. Dr. Maria Santos had become the galaxy's leading expert on resistance psychology, consulted by liberation movements across known space. Her analysis of the Zephyrian collapse was studied in academic institutions that had once taught the inevitability of imperial control. The key insight, she explained to an audience of former imperial subjects, is that oppression depends on the oppressed believing their situation is hopeless. Once that belief is shattered, the entire system becomes vulnerable. Her psychological warfare techniques had been adapted for use against other imperial species throughout the galaxy. The methods that had driven Zephyrian forces to paranoia and breakdown were now being employed on dozens of worlds against dozens of different oppressors. Fear, she continued, is a more powerful weapon than any technology, but it cuts both ways. Make your oppressors afraid, and they begin to make the mistakes that lead to their defeat. The audience, representatives from liberation movements across the galaxy, absorbed her words with the intensity of students learning the secret of freedom itself. The weapons of the Free Chief, Petty Officer Kowalski's innovations had revolutionized warfare throughout the galaxy. Her techniques for turning enemy technology against itself had been adapted for use against dozens of different imperial species, each with their own advanced systems that could be subverted. Every empire makes the same mistake, she explained to a gathering of resistance engineers. They assume their technological superiority makes them invincible, but superior technology just gives you more complex ways to fail. Her workshops on technological sabotage were attended by beings from across known space, each learning how to turn their oppressors' greatest strengths into fatal weaknesses. The techniques developed in the tunnels beneath Firebase Echo had become the foundation of galactic liberation. The sniper's evolution. Elena Volkov's network of coordinated marksmen had inspired similar organizations throughout the galaxy. Her tactical innovations were studied by resistance movements facing enemies with technologies far different from Zephyrian equipment, but the principles remained constant. Precision over power, she taught her interspecies classes. Coordination over individual heroics. Make your enemy afraid of their own shadows, and they will defeat themselves. Her students returned to their home worlds carrying more than just technical knowledge. They carried the understanding that any enemy, regardless of their apparent advantages, could be defeated by those with sufficient determination and creativity. The final lesson. 1 year after the evacuation of Kepler 442b, Sarah Chen addressed the First Galactic Congress of Free Worlds. Representatives from 87 liberated planets gathered in the rebuilt capital to establish principles for a new kind of galactic civilization. We did not win because we were stronger, she told the assembly. We won because we were willing to pay the price that freedom demands. That price is never surrender, never accept defeat, never stop believing that liberty is possible. Her words were transmitted across the galaxy, reaching both liberated worlds and those still under imperial control. On distant planets, beings who had never heard of humans began to understand that resistance was not futile. The Empire's end. The Zephyrian Empire officially dissolved 18 months after the failed conquest of Kepler 442b. Their remaining territories declared independence or were absorbed by the growing confederation of free worlds that had emerged from the human-inspired rebellions. Admiral Krax, now serving as a military advisor to the transition government, reflected on the irony of their situation. The most powerful empire in galactic history had been brought down not by superior force, but by the simple idea that freedom was worth fighting for. We studied their weapons, their tactics, their technology, he wrote in his memoir, which became required reading in military academies across free space. But we never understood their greatest weapon, the refusal to accept defeat. The price paid. The cost of liberation had been enormous. Billions had died in the galactic uprising that followed humanity's example. Entire star systems had been devastated by warfare. The established order of 3 centuries had collapsed into chaos. But from that chaos emerged something new, a galactic civilization based on the principle that no species had the right to dominate another. The human solution had not just freed individual worlds, it had freed the galaxy itself from the cycle of conquest and subjugation that had defined it for millennia. In the memorial gardens of Firebase Echo, Sarah Chen stood before monuments to the humans who had died in the resistance. Their sacrifice had purchased something priceless, proof that freedom was always possible for those brave enough to fight for it. As ships from across the galaxy continued to arrive, bringing former slaves seeking to learn the art of liberation, Sarah understood that humanity's greatest contribution to the galaxy was not technology or military tactics. It was the simple, revolutionary idea that no one has to stay conquered. The galaxy had learned the price of underestimating humanity, but more importantly, it had learned the price of freedom, and discovered that some prices are worth paying, no matter how high they might be. The resistance had ended.